Megan grew up in a small Midwestern town where the only things louder than the rumble of old engines were the whispers about her family's struggles. Her father, Rick Carter, owned a tiny mechanic shop on the edge of Main Street. The cracked sign above the garage door still read, "Carter's Auto." Half the bulbs burned out, but it was the only place in town where people trusted their engines with their lives. From the age of 6, Megan sat cross-legged on oil-stained concrete floors, passing wrenches to her dad, while other kids played on playgrounds or sat in front of TVs. Money was always tight, and as Megan got older, she understood why. Rick was honest and skilled, but he refused to overcharge like the bigger repair chains did. That meant they scraped by most months, sometimes fixing neighbors' cars in exchange for groceries or second-hand clothes. But Megan didn't mind. She loved learning every sound, every click and clank an engine could make. To her, they were like puzzles, each one with its own secret. When she turned 21, Megan knew she didn't want to leave her father behind. She didn't want college debt or a cramped apartment in a city where nobody knew her name. She wanted to build something right there, where her family roots were buried under concrete and motor oil. So when Rick landed an unexpected call from Granger Industries, Megan knew it could change everything. Mr. Granger was rich, sharp-tongued, and didn't trust small-town mechanics, but he was desperate. His old custom turbine engine, a massive piece of machinery that powered a huge section of his factory, had died overnight. 3 big city repair teams tried and failed to fix it, billing him thousands for nothing. The factory was losing money by the minute, and every idle hour cost dozens of workers their paychecks. Out of options, he called Rick, hoping he'd work cheap. When Rick arrived with Megan by his side, the factory crew watched them like they were a joke. Mr. Granger didn't hide his laughter. "This is your helper?" he snorted, pointing at Megan's messy ponytail and faded coveralls. Megan clenched her jaw but stayed silent. She'd heard worse. She let her father talk for both of them, nodding as he explained what he thought might be wrong. Inside the cavernous factory, the old turbine sat like a sleeping giant. It smelled of burnt oil and failure. For 3 days and nights, Rick crawled under pipes, checked gauges, and took panels apart. Megan stayed by his side, sketching diagrams on scraps of cardboard, listening to the soft hum of the dead engine like it was whispering secrets only she could hear. Mr. Granger checked in every few hours, smug and impatient. "Give it up," he barked once. "Call the big guys again. You two can't fix this dinosaur." But Rick didn't flinch, and Megan never looked up from her notes. On the 3rd night, when Rick fell asleep in the truck parked by the loading dock, exhaustion finally beating his pride, Megan stayed behind. She tied her hair back tighter, rolled up her sleeves, and grabbed the old wrench that had once belonged to her grandfather. Alone, under the humming overhead lights, Megan crawled deep inside the turbine's guts. She tapped pipes, checked for air leaks, traced wires until her hands were black with grime. When she found a hidden crack in a line no one had thought to check, her heart pounded like a drum. She whispered, "I've got you," to the sleeping giant, then got to work fixing what the experts missed. By the time the sun began to peek through the factory's high windows, Megan was still under the giant turbine, her hair tangled with grease and sweat streaking down her cheeks. Her hands moved with calm precision, tightening the last bolt on the new bypass she'd improvised from spare parts and scrap metal. She didn't have the fancy tools or expensive replacements the city crews used. She just had her gut, her grit, and the promise she'd made to her father to never quit on an engine or a person who trusted her. When Rick woke up and stumbled back inside, he froze in shock. There was his daughter, standing on a stepladder, running a final check on the control panel like she owned the place. She glanced over her shoulder and grinned at him. "Morning, Dad. Ready to see if this old beast still remembers how to breathe." Rick didn't even have words, just nodded, pride swelling in his chest. Megan wiped her hands on her coveralls, marched over to the main switch, and called out to the few factory workers who had drifted in early to watch the spectacle. Even Mr. Granger was there now, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, clearly ready to mock them when the machine coughed and failed, like it had so many times before. But Megan didn't flinch. She pressed the start button and stepped back as the turbine gave a low rumble, then another, like it was clearing its throat after a long sleep. A puff of steam hissed through the pipes, lights flickered. Rick held his breath. Mr. Granger leaned forward, disbelief battling with the smirk still frozen on his face. Then it happened. The giant engine roared to life in a burst of deep, powerful sound that rattled the tools on the workbench and sent vibrations through the concrete floor. Gears spun, gauges danced, and the hum filled the factory like a heartbeat coming back to life. The workers who'd gathered around cheered and clapped, slapping Rick on the back, staring at Megan like she'd just pulled off a magic trick. Mr. Granger didn't speak at first. He looked at Megan, this young woman in dirty overalls with dark circles under her eyes and oil on her cheeks, and he realized he'd been laughing at the wrong person. She wiped her hands, looked him square in the eye, and said, "The impossible engine was never impossible. You just never asked the right mechanic." Rick beamed beside her, his pride louder than the turbine's steady hum. For the first time, Mr. Granger extended his hand, but Megan just gave him a firm nod instead, her fingers still greasy and trembling from exhaustion. Word about what Megan did spread through the town by lunch. By the end of the week, bigger companies were calling Carter's Auto, wanting the girl who'd fixed what top engineers couldn't. Rick quietly watched his daughter talk engines with people who used to ignore their tiny shop on the edge of town. He knew in that moment that Carter's Auto would never just be a rundown garage again. It was becoming something bigger because of Megan. Long after everyone left that day, Megan stood by the turbine, listening to it hum, the same way she had as a kid when her dad's tools rattled in their tiny shop. She smiled, feeling the weight of the factory behind her, the workers back on shift, the paycheck saved, the pride restored. She didn't care if Mr. Granger ever said thank you again. She didn't do it for him. She did it for her father, for herself, for every broken thing she'd ever promised to fix. She shut off the lights, grabbed her dad's old wrench, and walked out of the factory into the sunrise, just a mechanic's daughter, covered in oil, who'd made the impossible purr again.